Hello, and thank you very much for inviting us to be here today. I am Jill Armstrong. This is Jason Ghaboos. I just thought I would correct the name a little bit there. No problem. And we are working together on this today as a presentation, and indeed on our whole project, to embody what it is we're trying to do, which is help create a more gender-inclusive workplace by getting men and women to work together a little more. Now, do I have a chart? There we are. It's our very small team, and actually only two of us are doing the work, but there you go.
I am one of them.
Yes, he is. He so is. We are together running a research initiative, which is about tackling everyday sexisms in the workplace. And it's all about making everybody feel that their contribution is valued. So that's how we fit into today. It's called the Collaborating with Men project, which is a title that I somewhat regret, but I'm stuck with it. So there we go. And the issue that we're addressing is the fact that, I don't know whether you all know, but actually still now, men tend to be promoted faster and further than women in virtually every workplace. Yes, there's been loads of gender progress, but still women are stuck not being equally represented, particularly in leadership positions. And a lot of this is frustrating to women. It's frustrating to women's ambitions, it's frustrating to their satisfaction. And a lot of it comes, according to research, from the gender unequal customs and practices that we all have lurking around in our consciousness, that we tend actually not to know, really, quite how influenced we are by all of this. There are deep-seated assumptions that we all carry around with us from childhood about what we expect from men and women, and we apply those filters through the everyday in terms of how we work. And there are really big differences in how men and women are socialised to behave. So does anybody, like me, admit to watching Love Island? Oh, yes, one or two waves around the room. Those of you that do will know exactly what I'm talking about, that men and women in those situations behave completely differently. And given any opportunity, the men and women kind of form little groups where it's just men and just women. And that so often happens in the workplace as well. Now, we do want to acknowledge that there are other sources of equality. It's not all about gender. We also want to acknowledge that actually this presentation is a touch gender binary. Our project is a touch gender binary because what we're dealing with is how men and women are perceived and judged by people who look at them as men and women, not how you identify yourself. And also, it's a very complicated issue, gender equality. It's a multi-headed dragon. So what we need to do is to be quite clear in what we're trying to address in this project. So we have two issues that we're going to talk about today. I'm up first, and I'm going to talk about the social relationships that we all form in workplaces, which are so important to how happy we are at work. And Jason's going to be talking about engaging men as allies. But before I go any further, I have a question for you. And the way I'm going to do this is nicked from early Graham Norton. It's a stand-up, sit-down exercise. So you're going to think about this question, and depending on how you answer, you're going to stand up or sit down. So here's the question. Out of 10, how gender inclusive do you think your workplace culture is when 1 is low, it's not very inclusive, and 10 is it's very inclusive? So out of 10, how gender inclusive do you think your workplace culture is? And if your score is 6 or below, stay seated. And if it's 7 or above, stand up. 7 or above, stand up. You may all sit down again. Thank you very much for that. A majority of people in the room were standing up. And it may well be that you do have very inclusive cultures. Certainly if you live by the kind of philosophies that Henry is promoting and we've been talking about here today, I can understand why you might have inclusive cultures. But what I'm here to tell you is that all the companies that we've worked with, and there have been quite a lot, there are some 25 in our program at the moment, virtually everybody stands up for that question. We have far more people think they are gender inclusive than are not, until we get to the survey that we've been doing. And then everyone is somewhat shocked to see the differences between how men perceive some of these issues and how women see some of these issues. And what these issues are is everyday, the way that everyday sexisms play out. So I want to give you an example of one thing. Okay, so it's an example of double standards. So women are judged more negatively when they behave in the same way as men. So this is one of the 7 issues that we've been researching. And so we posed that question, do you think that happens? And we gave a couple of examples that actually we know are differences. So for example, when a woman gives a man in particular a kind of negative feedback in a review, often that feedback is objected to more than if it comes from a man. There are other issues that play in this sort of area, like women being interpreted as being emotional. So when women are under stress, reacting kind of by getting emotional, and that is somehow seen as weakness, whereas men reacting with the same emotional stimulus will often just get mad. But that's the same kind, it's just a different emotional reaction, but men aren't penalised for that. So there are all sorts of examples here. And what I've got is some aggregated data from 3 scientific institutes, so big institutes around Cambridge that are working with cancer and the Genome Project and zoologists, that kind of thing. So 40% of women in these 3 organisations felt that they were unfairly judged when they behave in the same way as men, whereas 81% of men think this rarely happens to women. So, the reason I'm showing you this is because this is absolutely typical of all the issues that we've been researching. There's a big gender gulf in perception. Okay, but what I really want to talk to you about today is this issue of social networks that are formed around ourselves at work. It's important because the way we feel about our colleagues, the way we interact with our colleagues, just beyond the everyday of doing the work, actually is one of the things that make us quite happy about our life. It's also important because when you make some kind of social connection with the people around you, they are more likely to know something about you. They're more likely to involve you in the decision-making process. You're more likely to be involved in all the groundwork that happens before decisions are taken in formal meetings. Moreover, people know a bit more about who you are and what you do. So when an opportunity arises, the kind of opportunities that lead to promotion, then actually they know to kind of tap you on the shoulder for that response. Now, the problem is that these kind of social networks in a lot of places are becoming a little bit more gender binary, more so than they ever were. I mean, there's often a tendency for men to hang out with men and feel more comfortable talking with other men, particularly when you don't know people that well, and women to hang out with women. Not everybody. This is a direction of travel point. It's not an everybody point. But actually, these kind of social networks in companies that form kind of both in work, so in the canteen or in the five-a-side football teams, or outside work and who goes to the bar or whatever afterwards, are getting more polarized. So we've been asking about this, and this is data that's come from these same 3 scientific institutes, although we've got a much bigger sample set, and we'll be reporting back on that shortly. So science institutes are very male-dominated right the way through. So what we have here is nearly 60% of women thinking, actually, these informal networks, these social networks at work actually are male-dominated, and I'm concerned. And the men also are concerned. They see that happens. They see that the men hang out with men after work, that they know men better. They're concerned about it too. But what is really fascinating is we did the same research in a department of the civil service where women are very well represented through all levels, not quite equally at the top, but they are there at all levels. And we got a completely different issue. 75% of the senior women reported that this was a problem, this male-dominated social networks, versus 81% of men, their male peers, saying that they hadn't noticed the issue. And we think this is really interesting because the more women that are in the workplace, even if they're not equally represented, the more people think that these problems have gone away. But it isn't always the case, because these gendered attributes that we attribute to each other kind of go on underground in almost all of our heads. Now, another thing I think is worth mentioning is one of the reasons that this has got worse is it's an unintended consequence of Me Too. So quite a lot of the verbatims that we've been looking at in our survey and the conversations that we've been having with the people that we've been working with have said things like, actually, I'm a little bit more uneasy than I used to be about working late when there's just one other woman on my team in the building, or about going on a journey to a conference with just one other woman. I feel a little bit uneasy. I feel that perhaps when I am friendly and when I have personal conversations, that perhaps my motives could be misjudged. So I think that's an interesting social context point. So what I want to do is give you a few ideas about how to encourage men and women to actually form more relaxed social interactions in the workplace. And there are all sorts of ways of doing this. So, for example, men and women can mentor each other. There's an idea that came up in some of our work about Walkabout Wednesdays, where actually people are just charged with going to meet someone that they don't know, and ideally somebody of a different gender also. So just kind of being encouraged by the management actually to take a bit of time out and get to know people. And one idea which came from Happy, which is actually eating only in the social spaces. So actually, rather than eating at your desk, when you do have your sandwich or whatever for lunch, you actually chat to the people around you. So some ideas there about what can be done to make sure that there is a lot of mixing between people who don't necessarily feel comfortable with each other, between people who don't necessarily know each other very well. So this is, of course, a point that applies to men and women, but also applies to people of different ages and people from different backgrounds. So that's your task for the next 5 minutes on your tables to think about this question. What ways do you think will work in your workplaces to help more women, men and women get to know one another better? All with us? Brilliant. The thing I didn't say that I should have said is, of course, women make these gender judgments too. It's kind of quite important to kind of get that across. Anyway, Jason is up for the next bit.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Ghaboos, I'm 37 years old. I've still not worked out how to pronounce it, but I think it's Ghaboos. But so the first thing to note is I'm a man, which is biologically proven. I won't provide the evidence now, but the key for this is that actually, if you look at today's speakers, they're all female, so I'm kind of the token guy today. And actually, you see this quite often, that men don't often speak on gender inclusivity or workplace issues, so no pressure or anything on me. I am a Deputy Director in the Home Office, and I am on secondment currently with Murray Edwards College at the University of Cambridge as a workplace culture and gender inclusivity specialist. I've just added specialist onto that, but I think it fits. I'm adding it onto my business card. I want to start with a quick question, if you don't mind. So, are men as equally engaged in gender-inclusive discussions in your workplace as women? If no, stay seated. If yes, please stand. So I think before I just move on, actually, just on reflection of what some of you have said there, the whole gender issue is really interesting to me because my experience and our experience when talking to lots of different organisations and individuals as well, that by and large, lots of people, both whether male or female, think the gender issue is done. It's a belief that's widely held. And we've talked a lot about representation, and across the civil service, the representation rate is actually in favour of women by 54%. So 54% of civil servants are women. When you start breaking that down, what's really key is actually what are the experiences of those 54% of women, and where are they in the organisation? Are they equally spread at the senior levels? If you can just read the two quotes on the screen. Now, those are two quotes from two male colleagues at mid to senior level across public and private sectors. And what's really interesting is research increasingly is showing that gender judgments made by men and women affect male and women's experiences within the workplace. Both. However, what it does do is it inhibits women more than men. What tends to happen, which is really unhelpful, is that these kind of things are seen as a women's issue, and that doesn't help move things forward. It's actually an organisational issue that needs to be tackled positively. To do that, men and women really need to work together to create sustained and really significant impacts. That really does need to happen with more males bringing themselves into the game and holding these discussions. But how you do that is kind of really challenging. Example there about having women's networks. Some organisations have moved into just gender networks to try and start those off, but more needs to be done. So there's a couple of things that really we can focus on. Change needs to happen from the top down, and leaders really need to be brought into this. If you're in the senior level in an organisation, you need to be doing a couple of things really in combination to cumulatively allow and create an environment that's positive to enable these discussions to happen. First of all, there needs to be an awareness of the issues. So we've already touched on here that actually some people weren't aware those discussions aren't happening. So leaders should be really encouraging discussions to be held in the open and transparently. The next section really is creating desire. So what is the business case for that change? Gender inclusivity and workplace culture are really important in terms of delivering that bottom line productivity and utilisation and the outputs of any organisation. And we've heard from the previous speakers that have outlined that. Once you've got awareness and a desire, you really do need to have a knowledge. So some of the slides that Jill taught you through earlier, every organisation is different. So you need to have a detailed understanding of what those gender inclusivity matters are within your workplace before you can take action. So instill knowledge, invest the time to be able to understand what is actually occurring in the organisation that you lead. Next is an ability, and this one's kind of difficult and a lot of people struggle. So once you have the knowledge and you know that this is happening, do you have the ability in your organisations to tackle it? So investing in the training, investing in the coaching and mentoring to make sure both men and women are able as leaders, whatever stage of the organisation and leadership ladder they're on, that they can tackle these microaggressions and daily issues that women are facing. And the final thing is just reinforcing. Once you've put that in place and you've put the energies there to actually try and enforce and bring about a really positive change in culture, reinforce it. Don't allow management and leadership behaviours to slip back into the old ways of doing things because it's very easy to do that. So I've put a picture of me up because it's been at least 3 slides since my face has been on here, which I just realised as Jill was talking. I am not as egotistical as this presentation is making me out to be. So just a few, it looks like I've smelt something on the buffet that's really nice. So if people could just shout out what one word comes into the head when you're looking at that fine young gentleman up on the screen. Anyone? One word that summarises the emotion or the feelings that you think I'm going through there. Someone say smug. All right. So that is actually my first day at Murray Edwards at the University of Cambridge. And I was really excited to be asked to come and join Jill and the team to work on these issues. But equally, I was petrified. So before I joined, I was part of the Home Office's Gender Equality Network. So I'd been involved in discussions around gender equality, which were really important to me. But taking it to the next level and having these conversations on stage isn't easy. Sometimes you can be completely frozen by fear. Fear of cynicism, so why is he talking about this? Fear of what might happen to your career, in terms of people just thinking you're doing it for other reasons rather than actually the ones that you are, because you care about the subject matter. And also just questioning yourself as a male in terms of, do I have the right to even be talking about these issues that by and large affect women more than men? But individuals should and can take actions, and they form around, really, words and actual actions in particular. So, for example, as a man and as an individual, what I think is really important is that you make a visible connection with D&I topics and gender inclusivity, that you actually stand tall and show your commitment in words on your teams, in your leadership discussions and boards, whatever that may be. Sharing personal experiences. You don't often hear a man talking about their personal experience around gender inclusivity, whether that be observations on things being happening to women or whether they be things that are happening to men. Don't be afraid to engage openly in those discussions and ask men how they're facing too. That will encourage other men to talk up and speak out, and those discussions will start happening more freely. I think one thing that's really important, because often male-led discussions at a leadership level are always about benefits, and you should really extol the benefits of gender inclusivity in the workplace to the business, to individuals, and share them amongst your staff. You should also take action, and this one's really difficult, and you should think about how you can support individuals take this action, particularly men. So when you're seeing those microaggressions taking place on a daily basis, challenge them. If you've got people that you manage and you witness that time and time again, performance manage an individual, have the conversation, don't shy away from it because the conversation's hard. Take the people management and the corporate good citizenship role. So we've talked about how women are often in those roles or in the conversations around the D&I or around if we're setting up a female group, it's going to be led by females. Why not contemplate encouraging men to get involved too? There's two final things around level and role. Don't wait as an individual until you're at a senior level. Challenge things, have the conversations, make the observations, whatever level in the organisation you're at, and don't let your role stop you being involved. I mentioned earlier that these aren't women's issues, they're organisational ones. They're also not a HR issue, and it's not your D&I leads issue either. It's for all of us to tackle and make a workplace as positive and happy as it can be for everyone. If we don't do this as individuals, we make it more and more difficult for everyone, but in particularly women, to not be able to access leadership roles and bring their true and best selves to the workplace. It's a nice photo, though. So what I think we're saying here is gendered, see, it's not easy to say, is it? Gendered judgments affect everyone, but they affect and inhibit women more. It's important for men and women to work together to make those changes, but we've seen that men can face barriers and self-doubt into being able to actually engage in that discussion and conversation. There's an important role to play for the organisation as well as the individual. But there's a final question I'd just like to pose for your tables for the next 5 minutes or so. What more can be done in workplaces to engage men in these discussions? Thank you. Thank you very much for that. You've got some handouts on your tables that should assist in those conversations. Jill and I will be available all week, try the veal, over lunch if you want to grab us and ask any questions. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.